Third question of 12. How did the Bolsheviks consolidate their power? Now, this is a question that many candidates will look at and panic over, but it's really a nice question. You just have to remember consolidate means strengthen. So, background information. After the October Revolution, the Bolsheviks had power, but they needed to strengthen it. They really only had control in the major cities of Petrograd and Moscow. They wanted control over the entire of Russia. So how were they going to do that? So they would use positive ways, the carrot rather than the stick, to win support. They passed a series of decrees. Now, there's a number of these, but if you just remember the two major ones, that was a land decree. This was loved by the peasants because they promised to give the peasants the land of the rich, the church and the Tsar. So that won much support for the Bolsheviks and helped them strengthen their power. They also passed the Workers' Decree. Now remember, decree just means promise. And in the Workers' Decree, they promised workers an 8-hour working day and to have control over the factories. So they said workers themselves would control the factories. If you wanted to remember some other decrees, you could remember the decree on nationalities, which promised to end Russification. They didn't really do that decree. And the decree on titles, that was the promise to get rid of titles. They did that. No one was called sir or anything like that. Everyone was just called comrade from now on. Another thing they did to win support was end Russia's involvement in World War I. Now, this is a bit of a challenging one because many viewed this in a negative light. The most patriotic people didn't like the surrender from World War I, but others did, the majority did, because it meant no more deaths in war and it meant fewer food shortages. So the Bolsheviks ended the involvement in World War I. They promised to in the Decree of Peace, but they actually did it by signing the Brest-Litovsk Treaty in March 1918. That's a big one to remember, the Brest-Litovsk Treaty. And finally, they won support through propaganda. A negative side to this was they censored political opponents, but the positive side is they celebrated their own successors, sometimes imagined successors, through their own newspaper, the Pravda, and other propaganda means. So they're the ways the Bolsheviks won support. Let's look at the more negative ways they consolidated their power after the October Revolution now. So the negative ways can be seen as the stick. It's examples of them using violence and negatively manipulating the situation. So they got rid of opposition. So let's think of the ways they negatively got rid of opposition to strengthen their own power base. So they dissolved the Constituent Assembly. So the Constituent Assembly was almost like the Russian Parliament, and it resulted from elections that were held. Now, those elections weren't won by the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks only managed to get 25% of the votes. More votes were gathered by the social revolutionaries. Now, Lenin was not at all happy by this, and he was not willing to compromise his power base for the sake of democracy. He didn't really believe in democracy that much. He believed in communism and Bolshevik power. So when the Constituent Assembly was due to meet for the first time in January 1918, he wouldn't allow anyone entry to the building, using force where necessary. So he got rid of the Constituent Assembly. He also banned other political parties. He initially started with the cadets, which he banned first, but then he banned all other political parties. He also, interestingly, banned factions, which are mini-groups within his own party. So basically, in his own party, he said everyone had to agree with him. He then got rid of the Tsar. He executed Tsar Nicholas and his family, the Romanovs, on the 4th of July. And that marked the removal of a potential threat. So no one could ever bring the Tsar back into power. He was dead. And he also took away the power from the Soviets. He didn't want the Soviets to be able to challenge his own power base. So instead he set up the Politburo, which was a smaller group within the Bolshevik party that would rule the Bolsheviks and make all important decisions. He also used wider force to strengthen the Bolshevik power. So if you remember, we learned about the Red Terror. The Red Terror was a period of massive fear generated by violence in the USSR. Between 50,000 and 140,000 were killed during the Red Terror, most of these people being innocent, but torture was widely used as well, and gulags were open to the concentration and work camps. So this all created a climate in which people were too scared to challenge the power of the Bolsheviks. Now, the people that carried out the Red Terror were the Cheka. Now, the Cheka was the new Okhrana. So remember, the Tsar had the Okhrana, the secret police, and then the provisional government abolished it. Well, the Bolsheviks brought it back under the new title, the Cheka. Its leader during the period of Red Terror was Dzerzhinsky, and that's how it's spelled because I'm not 100% sure how you say it. Yeah. Now, the 4th of July goes back to the Tsar and the Tsar being killed, but the Cheka were the people that carried that out. And finally, to seal the deal of the Bolsheviks' power, they won the Civil War. By 1921, the Civil War was pretty much over, and the Reds had defeated the Whites, and the Whites were the opposition to the Bolsheviks' leadership. So that is how the Bolsheviks consolidated their power. The question might be phrased, how did Lenin consolidate his power? Exactly the same answer. Yeah? Now, this all happened 1917, 1918, other than the Civil War, which wasn't stopped until 1921. This is it presented as a revision card, which you'll get a copy of. And if you want to read more about it, it's on page 24 of the revision guide. Once again, how would you go about remembering this? Well, I would initially trace the answer with your finger and talk it through to yourself. So can you remember that the caret stands for the positive ways the Bolsheviks won support, and this picture stands for the decree on land, which won the support of peasants because the rich and the church's land were given to peasants, and so on. Can you talk it through? Then now turn the page over and see if you can redraw it and re-annotate it from memory. And then I'd put everything away and see if you could just say it whilst visualising the pictures in your head. And that is the end of the third question.